The key card wouldn't work. I stood at the terminal with my suitcase leaning against my leg, swiping it a second time, a third time, watching the little light blink red under the fluorescent lights while a line of people in sun hats shuffled past me, laughing, already on vacation in a way I hadn't gotten to yet. I remember the exact weight of that plastic card in my hand. Thin. Warm from being in my pocket the whole drive down. My name wasn't on it. My sister-in-law's was, printed clean and small under the ship's logo, like it had always been that way. My name is Renee. I'm 42 years old, and for 12 years I was the only person in my family who actually looked at the numbers. That's what this story cost me, not money, though there was plenty of that too. It cost me the version of my family I thought I understood, the one I'd been quietly building in my head since I was a kid folding my little brother's laundry. If you're the kind of person who stays until the end of a story like this one, hit subscribe. I've got a lot more of these, and I think you'll want to hear where this one goes. It started 3 months earlier, at my mother's kitchen table, with a paper napkin covered in her handwriting. She'd sketched out the cruise like a general planning a campaign. 4 cabins, 7 nights, the whole family together for the first time since my father's bypass surgery scared all of us straight 2 winters back. I remember the sound of her pen against the napkin, the way she pressed too hard and tore through it a little on the second cabin number. I'd paid for my cabin in full the week she asked. $640, non-refundable deposit, the rest due 60 days out. I remember because I logged it in my spreadsheet the way I log everything, in a column labeled Family Cruise 2026, right under the line for my property taxes. I'm an accountant. Have been for 18 years, mostly small business clients, the kind of people who hand me a shoebox of receipts every March and call it organized. I don't say that to brag. I say it because it matters later. My whole life I've been the one who notices when a number doesn't sit right. Not because I'm smarter than anyone else in my family, because it's the only language I ever felt fully safe speaking out loud. My brother Danny is 2 years younger than me. Growing up, he was the one who forgot things, permission slips, curfews, the oil changes on his first car. And somehow the forgetting never cost him anything. Someone always caught it before it landed. I used to fold his laundry when my mother worked doubles at the hospital, the same faded blue dish towel draped over the same drawer handle every single week while I did it, because someone had to keep the house running in her absence and it was never going to be him. I didn't resent it back then. I want to be honest about that. I didn't even notice it as a pattern until much later. Maybe that's the first way I failed myself in this story. I let being the reliable one become my whole personality, and I never once asked anyone in that house to notice what it cost me to be that way. Danny married Priya 6 years ago, in a backyard ceremony with string lights and a food truck parked crooked in the grass because the driveway was too narrow to back it in straight. She's sharp, funny, works in pharmaceutical sales, and I liked her from the start. I want to say that clearly because what's coming isn't really about her being a villain. It's more complicated than that, and I'd be lying to you if I made it simple just to make it satisfying. 2 weeks before the cruise, my mother called to confirm details. Rooms, dinner reservations, the excursion in Cozumel I'd already put a deposit down on. Everything sounded normal. Then, for days before we left, she called again. And her voice had that particular brightness she uses when she's about to ask for something she already knows is a little unfair. "Sweetheart, would you mind terribly if Danny and Priya took your cabin? Yours has the little balcony, and Priya gets seasick. And the travel agent said the motion is worse up top." I told her sure. Of course. I said I'd take whatever room was left. That's the kind of person I trained myself to be. The one who says yes fast enough that nobody has to feel bad about asking. What she didn't tell me was that whatever room was left meant an interior cabin 2 decks down, no window at all, a bed that folded out of the wall like something out of a submarine. And she didn't tell me that my keycard would come pre-programmed with Priya's name still sitting on the digital manifest, because somewhere in the shuffle of switching the rooms, nobody had bothered to change it back to mine. That was the moment at the terminal. The blinking red light. Priya's name where mine should have been. That was the first physical thing in this whole story that didn't sit right. And it would be 4 more days before I let myself admit that. I want to slow down here because the trip didn't fall apart all at once. It leaked slow the way a roof leaks before you ever see the stain on the ceiling. The first night, my father ordered a bottle of wine at dinner that cost more than what I'd priced my entire excursion budget for the week. He waved it off when I raised an eyebrow, special occasion. And I let it go because it was a special occasion, and because some part of me still wanted to believe there was simply more money floating around now that he'd survived the surgery than there used to be when we were kids. The second night, Priya mentioned, almost as an aside while we watched the sunset spill orange across the pool deck, that she and Danny were finally putting a real down payment together, once the transfer clears. Danny shot her a look. Just a flicker, there and gone, the kind of look you'd miss completely if you weren't the person in the family whose entire job for 18 years had been noticing when a number got said out loud that shouldn't have been. I didn't say anything. I filed it away, the same place I file every stray receipt somebody hands me in a shoebox. Something to look at later once I had better light. The third night was the dinner where my mother cried a little, the good kind of crying, watching all four of us at one table for the first time in years, candlelight catching the water in her eyes before she even noticed it was there. I remember thinking, this is why we came. This is worth the interior cabin and the wrong keycard and all of it. I want you to know I meant that. I wasn't performing forgiveness for anyone's benefit. I felt it, whole and warm, sitting right there in my chest. Then on the fifth night, I couldn't sleep in that windowless room. No sense of morning or evening in there at all, just the low hum of the engine through the wall. So I went up to the observation deck a little after midnight, salt air thick and cool, and I found my father standing alone at the rail with his phone flashlight on, looking at what I recognized instantly from 18 years of habit as a bank statement, folded into quarters the way you fold something you don't want anyone reading over your shoulder. He startled when he saw me, fumbled the papers into his jacket pocket like a teenager caught with a beer behind the garage. "Can't sleep either," he said too quickly. I said the same thing back to him, and we stood there a while at the rail not talking about it, watching the black water go by, and I told myself it was nothing. Old men keep strange paperwork on vacation. That's what I told myself, right up until we got home and I had a reason to stop telling myself anything at all. Here's where my profession stopped being background and started being the only tool I had. 2 weeks after the cruise, my mother asked me, casually, the way she asks for anything she's nervous about, over the phone while I could hear her running water in the background, if I'd look over my parents' finances, just to help them get organized for the new year, she said. My father's heart wasn't what it used to be, and she wanted things simple if anything happened to him. I sat down with 4 bankers' boxes of statements going back to 2014 at my mother's dining room table, the same table with the napkin sketch of the cruise still tucked under the fruit bowl for some reason nobody had thrown it out, and I did what I've done for 18 years for total strangers. I built a ledger. Took me 3 weekends. Coffee going cold beside me, the dish towel still hanging on the same drawer handle across the kitchen like it had never once been washed or replaced in 30 years. What I found wasn't a single mistake. It was a pattern precise and repeating like a heartbeat you can set a clock to. Every 8 to 11 months, a transfer out of my parents' savings, always rounded to a clean number, 3,000, 5,000, once 11,000, always memo labeled something vague like family gift or nothing at all. I traced every single one of them to the same destination account. Danny's. 12 years of it. I ran the total twice because I didn't trust the first number. The way I never trust the first number on any client's file. $218,000. I want to be honest about what I felt sitting at that table. It wasn't fury, not at first. It was something colder and stranger than that. The feeling of realizing a story you've been telling yourself your whole life was never the real one. I'd always believed we grew up modest and stayed modest, that there was never money for extra things, that when I asked for help with my wedding at 28 and my mother said gently there just wasn't anything to spare, she meant it as fact rather than as a choice about who the money was quietly going to instead. And here's my own failure, the one I have to own instead of hiding behind the ledger like it can do the confessing for me. I never asked twice. Not for the wedding, not for the down payment on my condo, not once in 18 years, because some old part of me had decided asking for help made me weak, and being needless made me valuable. I built my whole worth on not needing anything from anyone. That silence of mine left a door wide open in that house, and Danny walked through it every single time, not because he was cruel, but because nobody ever told him the door was supposed to be shared between us. I didn't confront anyone right away. I sat with it for 11 days. I want that detail in here because I think people believe accountants are cold and we're not, we're just slow on purpose. We check the number a second time and a third before we ever say it out loud because once you say it you can't take it back, and I needed to be sure I could live with what came after. Those 11 days looked ordinary from the outside. I went to work. I filed a client's quarterly return. I drove past my parents' street twice without turning in, just to see the porch light on. My father's truck parked crooked in the same spot it had been parked in since I was a teenager. On the 9th day I sat in my car outside their house for 20 minutes with a grocery store pie sitting warm in the passenger seat, going soft in its plastic shell, because I'd told myself I was bringing it over for no reason, and I never once opened the car door. On the 12th day I drove to my parents' house for Sunday dinner like always, and I brought the folder with me, the whole ledger printed and tabbed, because that is the only language I trust myself to speak clearly when I'm hurting. My mother was drying a mixing bowl with that same blue dish towel from my childhood kitchen when I set the folder on the table. She looked at it, then at me, and something moved across her face that told me she already knew this day was coming, had probably known it since the observation deck at midnight. My father came in from the garage, saw the folder, and sat down slowly, the way he sits now since the surgery, like his own body is something he has to negotiate with. I didn't raise my voice. I want you to understand that because it matters more than anything else in this story. I opened the folder to the summary page and turned it so they could both see the totals circled in red ink, the same red ink I use for every client who's been telling themselves a story their books don't support. I'm not angry that you helped him, I said. I'm asking why you let me believe there was nothing to give. That was it. 2 sentences. No shouting, no crying, though I felt both of those things sitting right behind my ribs waiting their turn. The room did the shouting for me instead. My father put his hand over his mouth. My mother sat down across from me and didn't touch the folder at all, like it might burn her fingers. It was my mother who finally said the line that I think about more than almost anything else from that whole year. We didn't think you'd ever need it as bad as he did. That's the whole story in 9 words. Not because it was true, because it was what they genuinely believed, and believing it let them live comfortably with the choice for 12 straight years. I wasn't a perfect victim in this. I'd built myself into someone impossible to worry about, brick by brick, on purpose. And they weren't cartoon villains either. They were 2 tired, aging parents trying to keep their shakier child from drowning, and they picked the sturdier one to stand on so they could reach him a little easier. Danny came over the next afternoon, once my mother called him, her voice thin and small on the phone in a way I'd never heard before. He looked like someone walking into a room he already knew was on fire before he opened the door. He didn't try to defend the money at first. He just sat across from me at that same table, in the same chair he'd sat in his whole childhood, and said, "I always knew it wasn't right that you didn't know. I just never had the nerve to be the one who told you." Priya wasn't there for that conversation, but she called me that evening, and this is the part one want to be fair about because it would be easy to make her the villain of this whole thing and she wasn't. She told me quietly that she hadn't known the full number either. She'd known there was help sometimes, the way in-laws often do, without ever seeing the ledger sitting behind it. And she said something I didn't expect at all. She said she was glad someone had finally added it up, because she'd spent 6 years watching Danny flinch every single time money came up at a family dinner. And she never understood why until she finally heard the shape of the debt he'd been carrying in silence the whole time she'd known him. The person who saw it clearest, though, wasn't any of us sitting at that table. It was my Aunt Carol, my mother's older sister, who came to Sunday dinner 2 weeks later once the dust had settled a little. She pulled me aside in the kitchen, drying her hands on that same blue towel, worn soft as paper by now, and said, "I watched your mother do this same thing with her own brother 40 years ago. Different amount. Same reasoning word for word, if you can believe it. She wasn't there to fix anything. She just wanted me to know that somebody besides me had eyes on this the whole time, and had simply been waiting for someone brave enough, or tired enough, to finally say it out loud. Here's what actually changed in plain terms, because that's the only way I know how to close a set of books. My parents sat down with me and, for the first time in their lives, wrote an actual will with actual numbers written into it, adjusted so the 12 years balance out instead of disappearing forever into vague talk about fairness later, after they're gone and can't explain themselves. Danny paid back a portion of it, not because I demanded it, but because he wanted to, in monthly amounts that fit an actual budget instead of an emotional one. My mother and I don't talk every day anymore the way we used to. We talk maybe twice a week now, but when we do, there isn't a hidden column running underneath the conversation anymore, humming away where I can't see it. That's worth more to me than the money ever could have been. I didn't feel triumphant when it was finished. I felt something quieter than that, the feeling of finally standing on ground that isn't shifting under you anymore, the kind of stillness you don't even notice you were missing until it arrives. I think about that blinking red light at the terminal more than I think about the $218,000, because the money was never really the story. The story was that I'd spent my whole life being the reliable one, and reliability, if you're not careful, can quietly turn into invisibility. Nobody sets out to disappear their own child by loving them steadily instead of loudly. It just happens one clean, round transfer at a time, while the sturdy one keeps folding the towel and keeps not asking questions, because somewhere along the way she decided that silence was the price of being needed. If there's one thing I'd want you to take from this, it's small, and it isn't dramatic. Being the strong one in a family is not the same thing as being seen in it. Sometimes you have to hand someone the folder quietly across the same table where you first learned to keep your mouth shut, and let the numbers say the thing you never once let yourself say out loud. If you've ever found out your family's version of "there's nothing to spare" wasn't quite the whole truth, I'd like to hear how you found out, and what you did once you knew. Tell me in the comments. And if you want more stories like this one, stay close. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.